to call it, but we're going to just talk about the ending here. I'm going to briefly brush over what happens here, some of the games, some of the betrayals and all of that, but if you want a more extensive breakdown, I'll probably have that for you later on where we talk about the games and all of that. But let's get into it. 50,000 subscribers, that's our big goal. Let's talk about Squid Game Season 3. So pretty much what we saw at the end of the previous season is that the rebellion that Gi-hun had led ultimately failed, and a bunch of the rebels, including one of Gi-hun's best friends, died during this process. So what we see happen here now is Gi-hun feels a very strong guilt and also anger towards people. He sees now Dae-ho, who was supposed to come in with the guns and help them, is pretty much blaming Gi-hun for the plan and the rebels' deaths, but ultimately Dae-ho confesses to Gi-hun that he didn't have any military experience and that he was also scared, which leads to Gi-hun killing him during the hide and seek game. During this hide and seek game, we see a ton of other horrible things. We see that Jun-hee has to go into birth and she has now sprained her ankle. So Gum-ja and Hyun-ju had teamed up during hide and seek, so they help her give birth to her baby. So now there's a baby in Squid Game here, but at the same time we also see Hyun-ju then get killed by the baby daddy 333, and he feels this sort of guilt as well because he didn't realize that they were just protecting the baby and Jun-hee, and he just walks away from this all. Now, before the hide and seek game also ends, we see another intense and dark betrayal because we see the son Jong-sik try to go forth and kill Jun-hee as he hasn't killed anybody. And in this game, if you're a tagger, you have a dagger which you're supposed to use to kill somebody in 30 minutes or then you get killed. His mother pleads to him to not kill Jun-hee, to kill her instead, but he wants to kill Jun-hee, so she decides to just kill her own son, which completely destroys her. We eventually see in the next episode that the people still decide to keep playing even though Jung-jae pleads and wants them to consider that there is a baby here now. They don't care. They want that money. He then urges Gi-hun to go forth and to protect Jun-hee and the baby as well. He's not really about it yet, but she then hangs herself. She just can't bear all of the guilt that has happened to her from killing her own son. The next game is going to be jump rope, in which they cross a bridge and jump rope. What happens here is that Jun-hee makes a decision that Gi-hun must protect her child, and she can't really move as good either because of her ankle. So what she decides to do is just sacrifice herself by throwing herself off of this edge and trusting the baby to Gi-hun, which leaves Gi-hun and Min-gi heartbroken after this has happened. VIPs now decide to make the new baby player 222, which takes Jun-hee's place. After the jump rope game, Gi-hun and the baby and the other players make it to the final game, and this is where the other players decide, hey, let's just kill Gi-hun and that baby, but the guards prevent this from happening. We then see that Gi-hun gets called into the office of the frontman, who offers him a lucrative deal. I let you and that baby live. All you have to do is kill all of the other players. And then he also reveals that he had been the player that was playing with him in the previous season, which angers and shocks Gi-hun. Ultimately, Gi-hun decides not to do this as he gets a sort of hallucination, a sight bug telling him that he is not a killer or a bad person. The next morning, we see the players go into the final game, which is a Sky Squid Game in which players have to push each other off of these pillars until one person is left alive. We see that Min-soo is the first one to get killed, and then Gi-hun and the baby are being cornered by the other players before we see the baby daddy kill player 336 and confesses that that is his baby and he is the father. We then have Gi-hun kill player 203 in self-defense. Now we just have a couple of players left, and we see that Jung-jae gets killed by Min-gi, who pushes him to his death, and the next player just throws themselves off because they're not going to deal with this, right? Now we finally have the final two players, or three should I say, because we have the baby. We have Gi-hun, the baby, and the baby daddy as the final players, in which we see a scuffle ensue, and eventually the baby daddy falls to his death, which leaves Gi-hun and the baby. So now Gi-hun makes a choice. This baby's a player, so this baby has to be the only one left, right? So what he decides to do is to sacrifice himself and declare that the players were humans, not horses, before jumping to his death, which shocks all of the VIPs and In-ho. So while all of this happens, we also see Noelle help player 246 at the beginning of the season, and what she eventually decides to do as well after getting him on a boat, she has to go back and delete all of the files on 246 so they won't come back for him, in the process also deleting the files on all of the current players as well as the past players that the island had, and her and Jun-ho actually are able to save player 246, as well as also Jun-ho killing Captain Park, who had been betraying them and not allowing them to come to the island on the orders of his own brother In-ho. The two brothers finally confront each other at the end during the Squid Game as In-ho holds the baby, but we see that he then is able to leave. We then see as 6 months later pass, and we see that the player 246 and his daughter are back together. The daughter seems to be doing better. It seems that people helped out, and Noelle actually crosses paths with them. She feels some type of way that she was able to help them, and she also receives news that her own daughter may be in China because she finds out about her own daughter maybe being alive as well when she was deleting all of these files. We also see that Noelle arriving at the airport to board the plane to seemingly go find her child. We also see Se-bok's brother be reunited with his mother. Of course, we had seen that he was with Sang-woo's mother this whole time and is now back with his own mother. The frontman then visits Gi-hun's daughter to inform her of his death and gives her both his 456 jumpsuit as well as all of his winnings to her. He also leaves Jun-hee's baby and the prize money that the baby won with Jun-ho, his brother, and pretty much that's where things are left off. Right before the finale though, we see that the frontman notices an American woman playing the recruiting game with a homeless man, which sort of showcases that the game is indeed continuing on abroad, because it seems that he is in like Los Angeles. So who is this woman? Well, it's Cate Blanchett who's playing this woman, a very, very big actress, of course, as many of you know. So the ending of Squid Game basically showcases that maybe the frontman could be changing. Maybe Gi-hun really got to the frontman. The island has now been destroyed where the Squid Games happened in Korea, but does this mean that we are now going to find out that these games are continuing internationally as well? I thought that this season really was the darkest, with a lot of different turns and twists throughout. I really did feel some way about a baby playing Squid Games. I thought that was so intense and dark, and really just showcases just how like humanizing these games are, and how the VIPs just see all of these people as just moving parts in this game. Like, they really didn't care to make a baby a player. I thought that was so intense and dark as well. I think Gi-hun as well, almost like losing it and just like losing all faith. He sort of got reawakened with Jun-hee's baby and saw that there is still life. There is a sort of a new breath out there that he has to continue fighting for. And I think it just goes back and forth with, I think when things look bleak and dark, you always remember there's another generation behind you and you have to continue moving forward. And I think if Gi-hun had sort of like given up, as he was about to do in the beginning of this season, I think that he thinks about what would have happened to that baby. Jun-hee was hurt and she wasn't going to be able to continue forward with the game. The baby would have met a dark fate as well. And I'm curious to see how we're going to continue on now with the new abroad game, the new American game, which is being held by David Fincher at Netflix as well. I'm curious how that's going to be, but I think that this is truly the end for the Squid Games in Korea. I do believe that we could potentially see these characters bleed into Squid Game in America, which could be Jun-ho or his brother In-ho. I think their story is not sort of wrapped up yet. I think we continue to see more of it in the coming season, whether that's going to be with Cate Blanchett being the new frontman. I'm curious to see if she would just be the recruiter or if she ultimately is the frontman at the end of the day. But I think that we could definitely see a big sort of like colliding with these two worlds right here. But the ending truly was insane, as Gi-hun showcased that no, you're not going to corrupt me. I'm not going to be stooping down to your level. We know that the frontman also in his backstory showcased that he had to take some of these choices that he was given to Gi-hun. And he sort of feels some way that Gi-hun didn't do the same choices as he did. And I think that really is what messed him up, when seeing Gi-hun make this ultimate sacrifice for the baby as well. And I think that that could potentially lead him to changing. And the whole self-destruction of the island could be seen as various things. He could just be hiding the evidence because he saw the Coast Guard was getting close to the island, or he really did feel some type of way about all of the sacrifices and everything that has happened here and wants to lead sort of a new life. Because also him giving the money to Gi-hun's daughter and also his jumpsuit to her, and as well as Jun-ho, the baby, and the money, could be seen as him sort of having a softer side, but also him just sort of like maybe just following the rules, and the money has to be given, right? Because at the end of the day, they just see it as a game. They aren't really going to keep the money and all of that. It's like, well, baby won. He can keep the money, but I think it was up to In-ho, like who would be able to keep the baby. And I think entrusting it to his brother was in his way the easiest way to do so, because he knows his brother is sort of righteous of sorts and would take care of this baby. Whereas he sees himself, I think, more of a person that's been truly corrupted down to their core. And I think that that's truly what that ending means here. In-ho, in your eyes, could be like saved. Like he is going to lead a new life. He is going to try and stop these games and learn from Gi-hun, or he's just corrupted all the way through and he's never going to learn and this didn't matter to him. But I like to think of it as the other way. I think Gi-hun's sacrifice truly opened the eyes of many and sort of shook everything up. I mean, Gi-hun's final sacrifice and everything that had happened that he led with Jun-ho and all of that did lead to the island finally being destroyed and potentially the games being over. It said game over at the end as well. And of course, it's game over for the game in itself, but I think it's more of a broader term to what happened here. So overall, the Squid Games are over in Korea. It seems that the frontman has now found out that the games continue elsewhere. Like, no matter what you think you're doing or you did, the games are going to continue, and I'm curious to see how that's going to be. What will Squid Game in America look like? What will Squid Game in America feel like? Do we see the frontman return to the American Squid Games? Do we see Jun-ho, his brother, try and stop those as well? This international level of things is exciting. It's kind of scary if they kind of mess it up as well, but it's still exciting to see nonetheless. But I think that Squid Game Season 3 ended on a pretty high note, so I'm excited to see how that's all going to be. So at the ending, I think you ask yourself, does this really lead to any change? Does this really lead to these VIPs, these elites, not seeing the people as sort of like just their amusement chess pieces of sorts and using them for their own entertainment? Of course, these very wealthy, very elite people have so much money that I think that they sort of have a warped mentality of things. We saw throughout the season as how they discussed several of the players, and also the newborn being added here as well was very interesting into the perspectives and sort of morality that these people have. And I think that at its core, that's what Squid Game talks about, is this sort of like power struggle that we have between each other. The players are divided between blue and red. Make of that what you will, and they are pitted against each other to fight to the death almost for the amusement at the very top that they never really get to see or interact with. These people just observe and they use them for their own gain and for their own push. I mean, at its core, really, it's a take on what capitalism does to a society in itself, where one is pitted against each other in order to make it to the top and almost get a sliver of that money. And really, nobody wins at the end, and everybody is just there fighting for this very small amount of money when you really consider how much money there is in the world and how much the wealthy really control it. So I think that's really what at its core the Squid Game show is talking about. I'm going to discuss that more in a theme breakdown, which I'll do over the weekend, where I talk deeper about all of these things that happened and what they mean exactly. But I think that we see that the frontman really almost come to a epiphany of sorts when he sees what Gi-hun does at the end, and it almost leads him to maybe wanting to change things, or in that final moment with the new recruiter, maybe seeing that there is maybe more games to play. That's up for your interpretation, I guess, and maybe until we see the new show and what it's going to showcase. But let me know what you think about that in the comments down below and what Squid Game's really trying to say. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. We're on the road to 50,000 subscribers by the end of the summer. I'll see all of you next time, and as always, stay safe, stay positive.